Greetings and welcome back to the 31 Nights of Frights. In the last episode, we took a look at Sean S. Cunningham's Friday the 13th, the first installment of one of horror's most beloved franchises. This truly marked the beginning of the splatter age of horror, and a ton of slasher movies would come along using the same formula and cliches established by Friday the 13th and 1978's Halloween. Included in this is multiple sequels from both franchises, ultimately giving birth to one of horror's most infamous icons, Jason Voorhees. And in today's episode, we're staying in the year 1980, but we'll be taking a look at a film that is vastly different from the splatter films. In fact, this film is vastly different from pretty much everything, and it still is. To this day, this film is considered one of the best in the entire horror genre, and that's for an infinite amount of reasons. And its legacy and influence continues generation after generation. To top it all off, this movie was directed by what many consider to be one of the greatest directors in cinema history, and the movie is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Now, The Shining is a film that's going to be quite difficult to talk about, and my reasoning for that is because The Shining is unlike anything else. It's a very surreal film to say the least, and it's hard to gather and summarise all my thoughts and feelings about it in a condensed sort of way. The movie itself is very hard to pigeonhole into a genre. I mean, if anything, you could probably say it's a haunted house type of paranormal film, or more fittingly, a psychological thriller. But even in doing so, the film is completely different to anything within those two genres. Maybe we can label it under the genre of Kubrick. I'm a big fan of Stanley Kubrick's work, especially The Shining of course, and A Clockwork Orange, which I think is somewhat obvious due to the name of this channel. Both of these movies are easily two of my all-time favourites for sure. Kubrick has always been described as a perfectionist and was a very demanding director. His films are all visually stunning and very aesthetically pleasing, which is due to his meticulous attention to detail in the composition of his shots and to what exactly it is that's in the frame. Additionally, his films can be very enigmatic, and as a result, very hard to analyse. None of these aspects of Kubrick's filmmaking are on display any better than in this film. Luckily for me, this is just a review of The Shining and not some kind of deep dive. But anyway, the plot of the film follows Jack Torrance, played by the one and only Jack Nicholson, a writer and recovering alcoholic who gets a job as the new caretaker of the remote overlook hotel located in Colorado's Rocky Mountains over the winter season. So Jack and his family, which includes his wife Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, and his son Danny, played by Danny Lloyd, go to live in the hotel in isolation during its off-season. However, the hotel has a dark and haunted past, and Danny begins to see many disturbing premonitions due to having a psychic ability called The Shining. Over time, Jack's sanity begins to deteriorate, putting his family in grave danger as he goes on a psychotic rampage, but it's a result of something more than just cabin fever. Now, my personal history of The Shining goes way back. The first time I actually saw this film was when I was about 7 years old, when my mum rented the VHS tape from our local Blockbuster. Obviously, the person working there gave zero shits that a kid wanted to watch The Shining, and obviously so did my mum. And looking back, I find it really interesting that as a 7-year-old kid, I was able to appreciate this film. For starters, it's quite a slow burn, and the tension builds gradually throughout the course of the film. When I was a kid, I'm surprised I was as entertained by the film as I was. I mean, I watched it multiple times. I think I might have been quite mature for my age, to say the least. But the point is, I've loved the film ever since, and even when I was a little kid, I knew that there was something about this movie that was just special. The film is loosely based on the 1977 novel of the same name, written by the legendary author Stephen King. And when I say loosely based, I mean they're practically two different things. It's a known fact that King has been bitterly disappointed with this adaptation of his work for decades. Despite King's dissatisfaction with Kubrick's take on his work, he did describe the film as having an inarguable brilliance that is just simply there, which is quite honourable. Now, I'm not going to go in the differences between the book and the movie because, for one, there's way too many of them to note, but we will brush up on the central themes. I also have to admit that I've never read King's novel, so I don't really get to have a say in the argument of book versus film. For starters, books and films are two completely different mediums, and things don't always translate that well between both of them. But of course, I can fully understand why King would not like this film. After all, it's his story. King also said that the casting of Jack Nicholson was a mistake, as it would be too obvious to the audience that he would go insane, and the role should have been played by a more everyman kind of guy. And that's a completely valid point, even though I disagree. From the opening scene, Jack already looks slightly unhinged. But I mean, that's just Jack Nicholson's face. He is an actor that has always been known for playing psychotic, crazed characters, especially since his Oscar award-winning role of Randall McMurphy in 1975's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But this is where Nicholson excels as an actor. He is one of the very best, and you simply cannot take your eyes off him. In my opinion, his enraged acting is unmatched by any other actor. I know for a fact my girlfriend is watching this part of the video in complete disapproval, as her favourite angry actor is Leonardo DiCaprio, and there's no doubt that Leo is fantastic at doing it. Nicholson is also my favourite Joker, and Batman 1989 is still one of my favourite Batman movies. In fact, it's one of my favourite all-time movies. This is completely off topic and a discussion for another time, but I think the Joker is a role that Nicholson was just born to play, and that's exactly how I feel about his performance in The Shining. And in this film, he really gives it his all. From moments of subtle creepiness to moments of genuine anger where he's just about on the verge of lunacy but manages to suppress it, and then full-blown psycho mode where he just goes mental, the latter of course being the highlight. Seeing Nicholson's descent into madness throughout the film is an absolute delight, and results in some of the greatest scenes of the movie. One of my favourites in particular is the scene where he sits at the bar and talks with the ghostly bartender, Lloyd. It's hard to explain what makes Nicholson's performance here just so great, but the way he delivers a lot of the lines and his facial expressions are almost cartoonish. His mannerisms are so comedic and offbeat, but just so perfect at the same time. To keep it short, Nicholson in this film is one of my favourite performances ever. I also think Shelley Duvall does a fantastic job in her role as Wendy. She gets a lot of flack for her performance in this film, and I think it's completely unwarranted. Duvall looks on edge throughout the entire thing, and when she goes into hysterics, it's very convincing. During the filming of this movie, she was under a lot of pressure, and she regularly butted heads with Stanley Kubrick, making the whole shoot basically a nightmare. Now, I won't go into details, but I will say that I recommend you do your own research on this topic, because there is a lot involved with it, but it could have certainly all been reflected within her performance. It's also a well-known fact that the scene where Jack goes full psycho on Wendy as they ascend the stairs was filmed a ludicrous amount of times, take after take after take. Remember when I said Kubrick was a perfectionist? But honestly, it resulted in what is probably the greatest scene in the entire film. For me, this scene even beats the iconic "Here's Johnny" moment. It might actually be one of my favourite movie scenes in general, and it's certainly my favourite acting moment from Jack Nicholson. The Shining is quite a slow-paced film that gradually builds in its tension. The film also carries this feeling of utter dread all the way throughout. It's kind of hard to fully explain, it's something that you've got to sit down, watch and experience for yourself, but the overall mood of this film is executed to masterful effect. I think a big part of this might be because of the music as well. A lot of the soundtrack for The Shining is very avant-garde, dissonant, ambient music, and it sounds horrifying. The film is unsettling from start to finish, and there's really nothing else out there quite like it. The movie also has some absolutely unforgettable moments and imagery, from Jack Nicholson peering his head through the door, which is one of cinema's most famous shots, the sea of blood pouring out from the elevators, and the guy in the bear costume giving the guy a blowy wait what? One of the scariest and most well crafted of these moments in my opinion is when the Grady twins appear to Danny in the hallway. The camera follows Danny for a while as he goes around the maze of corridors and corners, and then suddenly around one of these turns, there they are. The setup to this moment is genius, and I don't think the execution could have been any better. For me personally, it's the creepiest imagery I take away from the film. The Shining also somehow manages to make days of the week terrifying. Tuesday. A big aspect of Stephen King's story revolved around the themes of alcoholism and the deterioration of this family. These themes are still present in the movie, but are downplayed massively compared to in Stephen King's book, which also added to the overall disappointment of Stephen King. But in terms of the film, the fact of the matter is, nobody really fully understands or knows what The Shining is about. The photo at the end of the movie has caused endless discussion and debate amongst movie fans for decades, and it probably will as long as the earth still spins. People have analysed the shit out of this movie. I don't think that there's a film out there that has as many theories surrounding it and has been dissected as much as The Shining has. In fact, there's a whole documentary about this topic called Room 237, and it explains a lot of these ideas regarding what The Shining is actually about. It's a really interesting watch, but it can become really pretentious at times, and it also involves some absolutely absurd sounding theories about this film. The whole subject can get a bit silly, but there's no doubt that it is quite interesting, and it can definitely make you see this film in a different way. But this is all part of The Shining's lasting legacy. 1 million people can watch this film, and all of them will come out with something different to say about it, in terms of how it made them feel, and what they believed it was trying to tell them. Essentially, I've just given you the definition of a work of art, and that's what this film is. The Shining is a work of art. In conclusion, The Shining is nothing short of a cinematic marvel, and another masterwork by the great Stanley Kubrick. It's crazy to think that this film was his only horror movie, and it's considered to be one of the greatest in the entire genre. The film is no less than iconic. It's a staple of popular culture that continues to be referenced and parodied across all different media. I'm confident that the legacy of The Shining is one that will last until the earth stops spinning. It has influenced cinema for generations and will do so for generations to come, and there will always be the discussion over what the whole movie was really about. Its overall mood and tone is so unique and effective, and its imagery is absolutely legendary. There's so much I can say about The Shining that I've only really just scratched the surface. I could talk about this movie for hours, and I think most people could, to be honest. But to sum it all up, it's a one-of-a-kind movie and nothing short of a masterpiece. So that ends today's video. I'll be honest, I was slightly scared reviewing this movie, because like I said, there's just so much to talk about and dive into with this film. It's really hard to sum it up and talk about in that condensed way, but I've tried. I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comments all your thoughts on The Shining, and I'm sure they'll all be different. But anyway, join me in tomorrow's video as we take a look at what is considered to be the greatest werewolf film of all time, and another one of my personal favourites. I'll see you there.